ISTQB webinar, Making Your Team's ISTQB Certification Work for You as a Manager or Aspiring Manager. Today we'll be looking at the 12 most important steps in making your team's ISTQB certification work for you. You've invested in the team. They are now a well-educated group sharing common knowledge and goals. They are ready to apply what they have learned. Now comes the big challenge. How do you as a manager make this team work together to produce recognized high-quality products? What? Your company does not appreciate testing? Your schedules are too tight and budgets too strict? The code you are testing is somewhat less than high quality? It boots, therefore it works? You must work in the real world. Fortunately, we have Judy McKay, CTAL full, who has spent the last 20 years working in the high-tech industry with particular focus on software quality assurance and software testing. Today, she's going to talk about how to merge all of that good knowledge into the real world where we find less than ideal circumstances, but where we also find our paycheck. She, that is Judy, has managed departments encompassing all aspects of the software lifecycle, including requirements design and analysis, software development, database design, software quality assurance, software testing, technical support, professional services, configuration management, technical publications, and software licensing. Her career spanned across commercial software companies, aerospace, foreign-owned R&D, networking, and various internet companies. Judy has been conducting training seminars nationwide for 10 years, and I should note that she will be broadcasting today from New Zealand, so more than nationwide, actually global. Her courses are based on the real-world application of practical data, and she is also the author of 2 books. Managing the Test People discusses building and maintaining an effective quality assurance organization. A Software Test Engineer's Handbook is a soup-to-nuts testing manual that also serves as a preparation for the ISTQB Advanced Test Analyst and Advanced Technical Test Analyst certification exams. In addition to being the current president of the ASTQB, Judy also has a real job in test management and quality architecture, as well as a sideline consulting business. I am honored and so pleased to have Judy with us today, and I will now turn it over to Judy.
Thanks, Dave. I can't decide if I sound cool or just old, but hey, anyway, here we go. That's what a career in software testing will do for you. So we're going to talk about how, you've got this wonderful ISTQB certification. How do you make it work? Or the next question, how do I advance the slides? Oh, there we go. Okay, so first you got to think about where are you now, because this is always kind of an issue. And if you're wondering why there's a duck on this slide, I don't know. The duck just looked he looked like he was into it, so I figured he belonged on the slide. But you've invested in your team. If you've got a whole team that's certified, it takes a lot of time and a lot of money, really, to get that team all certified. So you've got a well-educated group, they've got common knowledge, they've got common goals, and they finally speak a common language. And this is actually I think one of the biggest benefits of an ISTQB certification is getting everybody using the same terminology. Because if you've ever worked with a global team, you understand how difficult it is to get everyone understanding what a test case is. So, you've got this, and you've achieved quite a bit because everybody understands the same basic knowledge here. And chances are they're eager to apply it, which is also, kind of an energizing thing for a team, especially a team that's, had a lot of work and they've had a lot of tight schedules, and, it's given them an opportunity to learn and advance their career, and now they really want to apply it. So you, on the other hand, want to get a return on your investment because you still had to pay for that certification. You probably paid for the exams. You want to make sure that they're going to leverage their training into higher quality products. But darn those obstacles. Maybe your company doesn't appreciate testing. Maybe your schedules are really, really tight. Budgets may be very strict. The code you're testing may be somewhat less than what you would consider to be working. This is a problem, right? These are things we have happen in the real world. So, while it's all good and fine to have a bunch of great theory behind you, and hey, we need better processes, and we're going to do all of these things, we're going to have these planning sessions, life's going to be wonderful, you still have to release stuff within schedules. You still have to deal with these budgets that are very restrictive. And you've still got to deal with the factor that the code that you're getting may not be any good, or the requirements may not even exist. So, there's a lot of theory of, doing good requirements reviews and all of these things, but, if you don't have requirements, that kind of goes out the window. So let's get real here. What do we really need to do? Well, first of all, we've got to bridge the ideal into reality because, we now understand what the ideal is, which I think it's a lot of the ISTQB talks about how it should be. And I think, if you're like me, you sit through the classes and you read through the syllabi and you say, yep, I agree, I agree, I agree. And then there's always the but. Trying to get that to actually apply is a whole different game here. So I've devised 12 steps here to be able to leverage the good practices and the knowledge of the team so that we can actually turn this around into a benefit. We want to make sure that we're able to improve quality and improve the value of the testing team. And I think ultimately those are really the goals because, everything else kind of comes along with it. If we can show improved quality and we can increase that, the way the team is perceived, that's going to give us everything else. That's going to give us motivation. That's going to give us more money. That's going to give us more time. So those are the things we really need to go for. Now, the other point I want to make here, just like, when you go to a class, you go to a seminar, right? You come out of there going, yeah, this is great. I can do this. This is going to be wonderful. And then you go back to work, and then you realize that you have 400 email messages that came in that morning that you have to read through, and you've got wall-to-wall meetings, and you've got somebody that's unhappy, and there's just no time. The time is just gone. And all of those good feelings you had and your desire to implement what you learned, that kind of goes away too. So number one here, you got to set a realistic schedule. So depending on your environment, depending on the needs, depending on the changes you're going to have to put in place, we're probably looking at a 2, 3, maybe even a 5-year time frame to actually implement the changes we want to implement. So the first thing that kills people coming out of these classes and having their team all certified is they go, okay, we're going to change it. And, they try really hard for a month and, no real changes happen in a month. And then they get bummed out and then they quit trying. So first thing you got to do is think about what kind of a schedule is realistic for you. We're going to look at these 12 points. But what I want you to do when you walk away from here is say, okay, now I'm going to take these and I'm going to put dates by them. And that's going to tell me when I can actually implement these things. So maybe this is a 6-month goal. Maybe this one, oh my gosh, that's going to take me a couple years to do. Okay, that's realistic. So anywhere between 2 years and 5 years is where you ought to be falling to get these 12 things implemented. If you can do them in less than 12 years, in less than 2 years, great. I mean, that is really good, and that means you've really got it together in your organization. But I would be pretty happy if you could come out saying 2 to 5, I can get this stuff implemented, because that's really where you're going to see the return on your investment. So as we go through these points, jot down some dates here. Walk away from this saying, I don't just have a bunch of good theory here, I have a plan of action. Now, remember, you've got projects in progress. You've got schedules you've got to meet. You've got management that may or may not be helping you here, supporting you, shall we say. So remember to be realistic when you're setting your dates. Otherwise, you're building more frustration for yourself. And if you wanted more frustration, you could just read your email now, couldn't you? So how do we make this work? Got 12 main points here, mainly because I like to make lists with numbers in them, but it worked out nice and it balanced pretty on a slide. So first one, identify the perceived value. Secondly, we've got to meet budgets and schedules, because you're just not going to be successful and you're not going to be able to leverage what you want unless you are still continuing to meet the schedules and the budgets. We've got to improve quality. It's kind of an obvious one. We need to spread the knowledge of what we've got here. So we've got a team that knows what they're doing now. And we probably are going to want to continue on with advanced certifications, maybe expert certifications. We want to have a method in place to spread that knowledge in kind of this environment of continuous learning. We want to push testing upstream. And remember, that's not something you're going to do tomorrow. That's something that takes some time to get everybody involved in the idea that testing and quality is a project team kind of goal. Do the static testing. Maybe an easy one for you. Maybe one of the ones you put in early. Expand into white box testing, maybe a harder one. You may not have the technical people to do it. So great, that's something that maybe you put into your hiring plans. Pick, use, and improve your tools. Sometimes your tools actually are inhibiting your ability to advance and to do more and to open up into other areas. So, you want to think about that, because maybe you want to change tools. Maybe you want to use more of a tool that you have. But again, changing tools is not something you really want to do mid-project. Number 9, manage. And I hate to say it, but in the testing field, maybe even, well, development also, but there's a lot of not managing going on. There's a lot of firefighting. There's a lot of dealing with the crisis of the minute, but there's not a lot of managing, meaning long-term planning, meaning taking care of your people. You got to make sure that you're managing. And then coming out of that, of course, will be building satisfaction, counting the numbers, because you may be very, very credible, but you're going to be a lot more credible if you've got objective data to back you up. And then the last one, you've got to demonstrate the actual value. So let's look at the details of these. So the perceived value, it's not necessarily what you think it is. Right? You have to figure out how do people really see your team? And of course, one of the ways to tell if it's a negative viewpoint is, do you get told you've got to work faster, or just, add more people? Can't you just hire some more people? Or can't your team just work some weekends, nights? Come on, just, take one for the team here. Okay, and in some cases, maybe that's okay, but does development have to do that too? Because there's your judgment call there. If development's also working nights and weekends, okay, then you're not getting the short end of it there. But if development is leaving at 5 o'clock every day and the test team is expected to work the nights and the weekends, then right there you've got a problem, because obviously the value of the testing team is less than the value of the development team. So want to be taking a good look at that, because if you're starting to see that, there is a perception problem. And that feeds into it. The less valued team is going to get the schedule cuts, they're going to get the budget cuts, and they're going to get the manpower cuts. So you want to protect your team. You want to be sure that you're showing value here. So the other thing you can do, and it's a little bit harder, but is to actually ask, how is your team perceived? Ask the developers, ask the development managers, ask the support folks, ask project management. What do you think of testing? What do you think we do well? What do you think we do badly? Get that understanding of how people really see you. And remember, you're not trying to fight down that perception. If somebody says, man, I don't think you guys do a good job at all, right? You don't want to get in an argument there. This is what's telling you what you need to change or fix, because it's a perception, and the perception's got to be that your team is good, high quality, working hard. It's got to be that. So when you're asking for the input, don't turn it into a debate. Take it as input. And then we need to fix it. So first tool we have in our new arsenal here is the test plan. Now, honestly, I got to say, before I got involved with the ISTQB, I was not really a big believer in test plans. They were pretty much documents we wrote, set aside, and no one ever looked at them again. But the way to make a test plan work is to have that review session. Have just an hour to go through that review of the test plan, and that way you can talk to the stakeholders and say, hey, let's look at these entry and exit criteria. Let's understand what the scope of testing is, and maybe also what the scope is not, and what the goals are. Just get the folks in a room for an hour and say, we'll just go through this. We're just going to do a review of the test plan. Because to just mail it out and say, okay, hey, everybody read this, it's pretty sketchy if they actually ever look at it. And honestly, I will confess, from years as a test manager and director, when I read people's test plans, I pretty much read the in scope, out of scope, and the risks, and that was about it. So, I'm paying for my own sins here. But it's a good idea to just have that review meeting so that you get all the stakeholders on board with what you're trying to do. Second point here is to talk about risk. Have a risk analysis and get people to understand that there is risk. And this is one of the things that it's so easy for people to kind of go, yeah, I understand there's risk. And yeah, that's why I have you to take care of that risk. Now, it's not fair. We can't mitigate all the risk in the world. I mean, there's always going to be risk in software. Having that risk analysis gets everybody else on the same page and says, you know, there is risk and we're not going to be able to mitigate all of it. So let's talk about what's important. For a couple things, right? This lets us prioritize our testing, but it also gets everybody else understanding that software is scary and there's a lot of stuff that might not work. And it's so easy for people to brush it off and say, oh, come on, it's just testing. How hard can this be? Start to, bring them into our world. You may scare them a little bit, but that's good because then they understand how hard our job is. One of the problems with the perceived value is that concept that, oh, it's just testing. Come on, how hard is that to do? So bring them into that risk analysis. Now, and again, people, you don't have time, right? You're going to have trouble getting people in that meeting. The way that I do it is I go ahead and just make a rough cut at the risk analysis myself. Just do it in Excel and, set out these are the highest risks I see, prioritize them. Just, give people something to criticize. If you go in there and say, okay, now we're going to assemble all the risks, people will just kind of go, and tune out or ditch your meeting the next time. But if you go in there with something for them to criticize, I've found I get a much better engagement that way. So, obviously you want this to evolve into where there's a lot more participation in contributing to it and giving you the risks and bringing up things. But I've really found people are happier criticizing than they are creating. So, or maybe we should say editing instead of creating. But I found that they're more engaged more quickly when they see numbers and they go, well, I don't agree with that. You can say, okay, great, why? And kind of draw them in that way, at least for getting them started. And then our next point here, your metrics. You've got to have the numbers because that's the only thing that really proves anything. The entry and exit criteria, they need to be measurable, and you need to be able to put those up on a progress chart so that people can see, hey, are we getting closer to being ready to exit or not? And development, are we getting closer to meeting our entry criteria? Maybe it's code coverage. Maybe it's, from their unit tests. But make these public. These shouldn't be just hidden little statements that say, hey, development should unit test their code. You got to say, no, development should reach 85% statement coverage in their unit testing, and they should be able to prove it. So we want to make sure that we've got those entry and exit criteria and that we're tracking them in a visible way. Put them on charts, bring them up in your project meetings, make sure that they're very, very visible. Cost to quality, this tells us how much it costs for things that get past us or get found later in the cycle versus earlier in the cycle. So we want to make sure that we can show what our cost of quality is so that we can show that it gets better as we do more work. Now, just to start with, right, you can put this thing up. I was talking to a customer, we were doing some outsource testing, and they had a defect that cost them, it had been out there for, I think, a month, and it had already cost them $100,000. Okay, one defect. Talk about cost of quality. That was one defect. How much would that have saved them? Well, obviously $100,000 if that had been caught earlier, and it should have been. It was a pretty obvious one. So those kinds of things get people's interest because those are real dollars, and people understand real dollars. The defect detection percentage. Track that. Make sure that you're really looking at what has gotten past you, what's out there in the field, got to production, versus what you caught. And make sure that people understand that, it's not just that one problem in production that got past you. We need to concentrate on the 999 problems that you caught. Because it's so easy to say, well, how'd you miss that one? The testing team, man, they're just doing crummy work. Right? That's really important to have that number out there so they understand the difference. Real numbers from real projects get people's attention because they can understand it. It's not some theoretical, hey, this would be great if we did the stuff this way, right? These are real numbers, real costs, real dollars, real time. That makes sense to them. So number one here, fix that perceived value. Meeting the schedules and the budgets. Well, who's holding the software when the dates are missed or charging the budget when it overruns? But usually us, right? Because we're at the end of the cycle. But who really caused the slip and the overrun? Well, so ways to get around this. Track the testing schedule days in allotted days, not from start to end, because there's a lot of time where we don't we're not able to test. We're not able to start testing. We're not able to test effectively. We want to track the days that we actually can test, the days that are allotted to us. When you're looking at elapsed time, it tends to not happen. So if we say, hey, we have 2 months to test, but out of those 2 months, we only got 10 days of testing time, that's the one you ought to be tracking. Same thing with the budget, right? How much money did we actually spend of how much was allotted? Make sure the PM manages the overall project. That should not be your job to be doing the project management towards the end of the project. The project manager is supposed to do that if you have a good one. Hopefully you do. If you don't, go try and recruit a good one because they save you so much time and effort and, swearing. Be sure you're tracking the test coverage, the risks, the requirements, the code, and map that coverage to the schedule. So this should be a progressive chart showing how we're doing and what our projected trajectory is. Because this tells people, are we on track or not? If we're 50% through with the time and we've only done 10% of the coverage, we got trouble. So make sure that we're tracking this progressively. People can understand that and they can see it. If you just go into a meeting and say, oh man, we're behind, we've only done 50% of our tests, that's not as meaningful as showing this thing on a chart with a trajectory. That will make a lot more sense to them. And be ready to answer the very difficult question of, well, if you had 2 more weeks to test, what could you do? And honestly, I always go back to risk mitigation and say, well, if I had 2 more weeks, I could cover these risk items or these requirements items. I've never had charts good enough to be able to project what my defect find rate would be, to be able to say, well, I expect to find 6 more defects. It requires really good tracking and real consistency in your projects. But I am able to say, hey, if I had 2 more weeks, then I could hit these risk items, I could cover these, or maybe these requirements, right? Because I can track this back to the coverage. So that works well for me, and then people are able to understand what 2 more weeks means. They're also able to understand what 2 less weeks mean from that. So, I've certainly been in a number of meetings where that's come up with, well, we need to ship it 2 weeks earlier. What does that mean to us? Great, here's my charts. This is where we're going to stop with the risk. This is where we're going to stop with the requirements coverage. If that's okay with everybody, great, but at least we all understand. Improving quality, number 3 here. Our goal is always the highest quality possible, but of course our issue is defining possible, dealing with time, dealing with training, and dealing with people, and dealing with all sorts of other factors too. Honestly, incoming quality often defines how good the outgoing quality is going to be, because if you're getting really crummy software in, there's only so much time you have allocated for testing. There's only so many defects you're going to find, and you have the risk every time they fix a defect, they're probably going to break something else if it's really bad quality. So, that is very much a factor. So if we want to improve quality, obviously that incoming quality would be the best way to improve it. That, I've actually had this said to me in meetings of, well, just do the best you can. Yeah, we know the schedule's bad, just do the best you can. And then of course the other part of that is that way we can blame you later when it's not good. And I mean, not to be overly negative, but generally the testing group gets the blame when defects hit the field. So that just do the best you can isn't good enough. You basically got to quantify what you can do and what you cannot do using those charts I just talked about in the previous slide there, and making sure that everybody else understands too what we're looking at here. I have time written across the bottom there because that's always the one biting at my heels. So with incoming quality issues, we want to have good entry criteria in the test plan that everyone agreed to. Now remember, when you write the test plan, that's when everybody's happy. It's the beginning of the project. Everybody still likes each other. That's when you get them to agree to entry criteria. Then tracking these with metrics, we're able to show what is the unit testing coverage. Has the static analysis been done? These are not optional, because as soon as those things are not done, we know we're getting a lower level of quality coming in. We also know that bug fixing is going to be more difficult and we're going to have more problems introduced. So this is a thing right at the beginning. If people are not doing the unit testing and the static analysis, we need to have the metrics that show they're not doing it. Then we have something to talk about at the end of the project when we have problems. So just going and saying, at the very first project saying, well, unit testing is only 19% coverage, it's hard to make an argument that that's going to make a difference until you get to the end and can prove it made a difference. So you do that by tracking every time you write a defect. This is a defect that should have been caught in unit testing and instead was caught in system testing. And then you can look at your cost of quality, and you can look at what that coverage cost you, or slipping that coverage cost you. Objective metrics are what we need to use to determine the testability of a release. So objective metrics, code coverage in unit testing, static analysis, errors and warnings. Those are the things we're looking at to determine if this code is really going to be testable or not. And our next point here, make sure you're using those test strategies. Your team learned a lot about test strategies. So if your time is an issue, I always go with risk-based. Just because that's the best way for me to combat not enough time, but still the need to actually do the testing and do something, right? And understand what that something is, and maybe more importantly, what that something isn't. So time is an issue, I go with risk-based, and then tracking that residual risk as the time runs out. And our testing techniques. You guys know a lot of testing techniques. You can do better testing now. You can reduce the tests you need using equivalence partitioning. You can test the combinatorials intelligently with your advanced team. They know all about combinatorial techniques, pairwise testing, orthogonal arrays. They're all over that stuff and dying to use their newfound skills. Let them. It's going to help you actually to get through your testing faster and with a higher level of quality. Make sure you're verifying that code coverage, because honestly, that is the best way to shorten the testing time, is by having better code to start with. Most of our testing time goes to defects. So the fewer defects we have, the faster we're going to go. Make sure your team is using the right technique in the right situation. One of the problems I've had with my teams is they come with their spanky new certification, but they're not really sure how to really apply those techniques in a situation at work. So what I found works really well is to sit people down and say, okay, look, here's a problem, or here's something we need to test. Now, how could we use decision tables to work this through? And actually sit there at lunchtime, or whenever you can squeak in the time, and work out a decision table so that people can see how to apply those techniques in real life, in a real situation. A lot of times, when you're learning a technique, it's a fairly simplistic example and it's pretty straightforward, because you don't want your students to leave in tears and stuff. But in work, we expect them to leave in tears, right? But at work, it's harder to apply these. So this is where it really helps to come in and say, okay, well, let's take one of these techniques, let's use it, let's show how this works, let's draw a state diagram, let's figure out how we can do the combinatorials, and kind of work together some cases with people. They'll get in the habit of working together also and leveraging their knowledge. So it's a really good way to both, kind of build on those skills, as well as to actually apply them to your problems of needing to fix quality. Use your experience-based testing to leverage the team's experience, and they know how to do experience-based now. They know how to do it right. They know how to document it. And you're going to get a lot more out of that than you would have out of previous just ad hoc kind of testing. Spread the knowledge, and kind of went into this already. Time-constrained teams will tend to silo. They will tend to work just on their own stuff and not talk to other people. They're busy. They don't have time to train. They don't have time to talk to each other. So cross-training doesn't happen. The experts do what they do because they're faster. They don't spend time teaching the people that could come up to speed on it, and you end up in this situation where everyone's just kind of working in desperation. And obviously, if somebody leaves, we're in big trouble here. But this is not good, because you're not going to build your team that way. They're not going to be able to feel like they're learning anything new. They're not going to feel like they're able to utilize their new knowledge. So we've built a base level of knowledge. Everybody's got that, so they've got a common base. Now you just need to create opportunities to leverage the knowledge and build an environment of continual learning. This is one thing I'm hammering on at my current job, because traditionally they have not done that. They've had kind of little pocket assignments, and they've done their little pocket assignment and then moved on to the next one. And there hasn't been this environment of learning off each other, both about products and about using techniques. So it's kind of a new thing for them, even that concept of working together and leveraging each other's knowledge. So, and actually it's kind of interesting, because they're getting really bright-eyed in the morning now. They come in and they're like, oh, we're going to work on this today, and a lot happier than just, oh, I got to go test the same thing. So, it's been kind of inspirational for them as well, and obviously a great benefit to the products we're testing and the company, and leveraging that knowledge. So, but you got to work on this, and generally you've got to lead by example. You've got to go in and have some of these training sessions yourself, lead them yourself, get people together, get them thinking about how to do this stuff. Push that testing upstream. Bad code makes for long testing schedules, frustrated testers, time constraints, and all the things that we hate. And that throw it over the fence, I was going to say metaphor, but sometimes it feels like it's real, doesn't it? It's pretty common. So testing has got to start with the requirements. I mean, this has been hammered in and hammered in. And even if you don't have requirements, there should at least be design sessions, things that you can sit in and talk it through. So it doesn't have to be a written document, but you've got to talk through it with people. You've got to talk to it. And the way that I approach it from a testing standpoint is say, I need to understand how to test this thing. What are the critical points? Where do you think that we're going to see problems? And that gets them talking. And that way it's not me criticizing the requirements, it's me understanding how to do my job better. So it's kind of an easy way to approach it. If we have continuous testing, we're going to get continuous improvement in our products. But that means that everybody's got to own the thought of testing. And it's a hard thing to get across. I knew I'd finally achieved it in one company when we had a defect come in from the field, and the developer said, oh man, I should have caught that. And I, of course, said, we should have caught it as a test team. And then the BA stepped up, the analyst stepped up and said, oh man, I bet my requirement wasn't clear. You think, you know what? That's a team that owns it. They own quality. And that's really our goal, is to get a team that owns quality. They all feel responsible for it. But in order to do that, they've got to have this concept of the continuous testing. Everything needs to be tested. And that way we're kind of pushing it back upstream, like salmon, but kind of pushing that back so that the concept of testing is throughout. But honestly, test management, you're going to have to seed this. You're going to have to start it yourself. You're going to have to start with the requirements reviews and design reviews until people get used to seeing the test team in those kind of meetings. And then they'll start to get used to it and say, oh, well, we better look at this, because otherwise those testers are going to find this. And it builds slowly. But again, we're looking at something probably a year, really, to get this in, get it going, and get it really working smoothly. So again, not a quick thing to do. Talk to development, make sure they're using code coverage tools to verify unit testing. And actually what I found is that they've got curious about it. We kept talking about code coverage tools, and they went, I wonder what we are getting. And they ran it against their unit tests. They were horrified. But, that's a good thing. So, that's one we want to track. We want to work out a plan to increase the code coverage with their unit testing, and work from there. Maybe they don't do unit testing. Maybe it's some kind of odd code that doesn't unit test very well. Okay, then let's put it in integration testing. Turn on those code coverage tools. You can turn them on at any point in time and see what the coverage is. Track this and try to get this back as far as you can in the development cycles. Make sure you've got real integration testing. Not just throw it together and hope it works, but is there a plan for integration testing? Is there a phase for it? And at one company where I worked, we had to actually put the developers in charge of integration testing, because they kept throwing stuff into our test environment and it didn't work. We couldn't build up a separate environment. It was too complex, but we gave them our environment, and they had to prove to us that the code would work in our environment, because we kept getting that, hey, it works for us, right? And boy, did that straighten them up, because very quickly they went, whoa, this stuff doesn't work. And they weren't aware of all the integration issues that we were facing. So that really helped kind of enlighten that integration testing needed to be a separate phase, and was a very important part of keeping the overall testing on schedule. And again, make sure you've got entrance and exit criteria, make sure they're measurable, and make sure that you're making them stick, or if you're not able to make them stick, that you're accounting for what it happened because you didn't hold to it. So, for example, because they didn't do integration testing, how many defects were found that were integration related? So you got to be tracking those metrics, because otherwise you're just complaining. Unless you can go in and say, look, I've got proof of what this cost. Do the static testing. The old problem, there's never enough time for reviews. Reviews are, they're a waste of time. Test team, oh, what do they know? Or they're not going to be helpful in this, or, back to not enough time. Documents to be reviewed don't exist. certainly had that in a few organizations. Test team is busy finishing up other projects that have probably slipped their schedule, so they can't get free to go do reviews. And again, not enough time for reviews. Can you see the recurring theme here? So your team knows how to do high quality reviews. They've learned that and they're good at it too. So pick a review type that makes sense. Maybe walkthroughs make sense for your organization. Maybe they need formal inspections. All depends. I usually tend to start with the more casual first. That seems to go over better rather than going in with a real formal approach, because the formal tends to scare people off a bit. But so pick whatever review type makes sense, and then review. Usually start with the requirements and the designs. Those are usually, if anything's documented, that's probably documented. And start with a small group, document the results that problems that you found, and then we can check that again against what did we miss, what should have been caught, what really was requirements or design defect, and get better at it. Get better as we go. Now again, if you don't have written documents, fine, you can still have a session. You can still talk it through in a session. So that's a good thing to do. We want to document the results, of course, so that we know, we have proof of what we're doing and how we're getting better. And then after you've got that kind of people used to having the concept of reviews, that's when you move into code reviews, static analysis. Generally and again, it's general, right? But generally the folks that write the requirements and the designs are usually a little more amenable to a review than the developer having their code reviewed. So, start where it's the easier nut to crack, which is usually requirements, because usually the analysts are the easiest ones to get to. If you don't have analysts, somebody's writing requirements. So that's still the one to review. And again, you could approach it with, hey, I had some questions. I'm not really sure how to test these things. Can we just talk about them? Very casual to start it, and then work up to more formality as people see that there is actually benefit from it. But if you go in and say, hey, we need to do formal reviews, you'll tend to get more pushback. So ease into it, let people see the value, and then it's a lot easier to sell it. And of course, always make sure that your test documents are reviewed as well. Kind of helps people get in the habit of it. Now, and again, another point here to using our new education, I've had a terrible time getting people to review test cases because they probably are one of the most boring documents ever written. But I've had really good luck getting developers and analysts to review decision tables. That intrigues them. So, that might be a good way to start. Hey, look, we've got a new test technique we're using. Could you look at this decision table and let me know? And I've actually had analysts say, well, I could have just written the requirements this way. And everyone nods their head and they go, oh. And suddenly you've just really improved the quality of the requirements as well as introduced a testing technique. So, little subtle gains here from things we can do. Expanding into white box testing. Now again, depending on your code, depending on what you've got, this may make sense, may not. Does your defect detection percentage indicate you're missing things that you could have caught with white box testing? Do you think your coverage is not good enough with black box? And then, do you have the skills, the time, and access to the code? So first thing, when we're looking at the defects that we missed, you got to be realistic. Could you have caught them? Sometimes they're just things you go, well, we never would have caught that. It's something that it's a weird customer configuration. It's some weird data thing. But, if you start to see patterns here, this is when you start to look and go, maybe we should have done more. Look at the code coverage tools to see what your black box coverage is. You want to come through this and say, we think we're hitting 80% of the code, but I got to tell you, I've done surveys with people in classes and organizations I've worked with, and their average black box coverage is about 18% of the code. So that's kind of scary when you get right down to it. So you really want to turn on those code coverage tools, see what you're getting in your black box testing, and then go back and look at, is that stuff I should hit, or is that stuff that doesn't really matter? So you may need to sit with the developers, or if you've got technical test analysts, they can do it for you. But the whole idea is to target the white box testing. If you try to just, say, I'm going to white box test everything, you're not. So you want to be targeting that to the stuff that you're not covering well with black box and the stuff that's particularly risky and scary. Tools. Suboptimal tools not only are time wasters, but they will really improve your team's ability to swear. So, as soon as people log into your bug tracking system and start swearing, you need to work on that tool. People get really frustrated with poor tools, awkward tools, tools that require a zillion fields and that don't matter. You can lose data if you've got tools that don't interface well, politely. You could spend time creating reports that you really could spend doing other stuff. And sometimes it's very difficult to disseminate data because you've got, for example, you've got your test cases in Excel or Word, heaven forbid, and that it's difficult to share that data or to put your status up. So make sure you've got the best tools available, using the information you learned on picking tools, right? Are you using the best tools you can? And are you using them optimally? This is sometimes time to bring in a consultant and say, hey, is there a better way I could use this tool? Is this something I could do better with it? There's a lot of tricks to these tools. And, sometimes the vendor can help you, but, sometimes they can really make it a lot more efficient. So get rid of fields you don't need and quit annoying people by making them enter fields that they don't need, because that just wastes time, and it wastes a lot of time. So, if it takes 50 fields to enter a defect, pretty soon people are going to be sending email to the developer to get it fixed rather than actually fixing it right and entering it into the system. Or they're going to pick the first item in every single drop-down menu because it's a lot faster and it's a lot easier. Make sure you're tracking the critical fields that you need to do cost of quality and to do defect detection percentage. So you want to be looking at the phase the problem was introduced, the phase the problem was found, so that you're able to see, who found it, when did you find it, and then what phase of testing found it, so that you can get real numbers out there, because you remember you need those cost of quality and the DDP numbers to be able to improve the value of the team, the perception of the value. Get your technical test analyst to work on glueware to make the tools work smoothly together. You can write some pretty slick code to glue things together, to create dashboards that are going to put up data. It can be really clean. It's worth the time and it's worth the money to develop that software, because it saves you so much time otherwise. Make sure that you're creating and publishing reports that prove your value as an organization. Make sure that what you're doing is showing what you have saved the company from, what you're really doing that's good. Okay, manage. Number 9 here. That seems obvious, doesn't it? Well, you know what? It's not. I swear. So many times when we're in on a consulting deal, it's because the test manager is probably not doing a good job of managing. And it's kind of frightening, actually. In the number of organizations I've worked for or worked with, most of the test managers, honestly, aren't that good. Now, obviously not the people on this call, because you wouldn't have logged in if you weren't caring about trying to be better and trying to do a better job. But we as test managers, I don't think are doing the optimal work that we could. It shouldn't be firefighting. You're not going to have time to talk to your people and build their skills and do the cross training that you need to do if all you're doing is apologizing on the phone for defects that got out and fighting fires. It's just not going to happen. If you're swamped, you got to get your processes under control. You probably need to delegate, and you also need to allocate some time in your schedule for your people. Maybe it's just an hour, but you need to have some time where you're actually a human and not just a frantic person running around crazy with your hair on fire all the time. So you need to make some time in your schedule. Finding and creating metrics should not be killing you. It should not be what you're doing that's spending hours and hours and hours every day doing. Your tools need to do that. Get your technical test analysts to help you there. But remember, people need responsibility. Give them some stuff to do. Use your test plan to plan your projects. Make sure that you've got the proper control metrics so that you're able to monitor and report easily. You don't end up with the problem of you're halfway through a project and you go, oh, what do you mean we're 1/8 into the work that we need to do, right? You want to make sure that those control metrics are right there all the time so that you don't get surprises. Make sure you're following up on escapes and fix the issues. Why are things getting past you? And how can this get better? Again, if you've got advanced folks, use them for this. They're great for this. Advanced test analysts, even your foundation folks that are good and showing a lot of potential, have them analyze escapes, have them figure out what got missed and how that can get better. Make sure you automate that metrics publishing. Can you tell I keep going back to this one, the time spent with metrics and doing reports. Train your people, create opportunities, and let them grow. Don't assume that they can't do it. Give them a try. They may need a little help to start with, but isn't it going to be a lot better if there's 3 of you instead of 1 of you? Well, assuming, personality-wise that works for you. But, you want to make sure that you're able to distribute that work. Also, as soon as other people help you build the reports, they understand what those reports are used for, and they understand how important they are, and suddenly they care a lot more about the data they're putting in. So again, let them have those opportunities. It's going to benefit you overall. And then build our relationships with doing the risk analysis, doing the reporting. Make sure that we have good relationships with the development managers and the support managers. Build satisfaction in your team, and you can see this is kind of leading up to this. It's going to happen, right? Your test team is not going to be real satisfied if they're getting pounded all the time. How'd you miss this? How come testing takes so long? Oh, why don't we just have the developers do the testing? Or as one manager told me one time, we could just get monkeys off the street to do your job. That's just not good. You just really don't want to be hearing that. So we can't produce quality products when we're frustrated all the time and spending most of our time updating our resumes. That's just not a good way for your test team to spend their time. They've got to care, but they've also got to feel that there's a return on their investment. So make sure that they're getting some benefit out of their job. They're getting satisfaction. Hiring and training is a significant investment, and we want to make sure that we're actually leveraging it. So be realistic. Let people use their knowledge. Let them understand and grow. Track the metrics so we can explain what's been done versus what should have been done. That way we know, we're not surprised. How's our risk mitigation? How's our coverage? How's our defect detection percentage? Test teams are happiest, honestly, when we use honest metrics. They understand numbers, and they understand having a goal to improve numbers. They'll work really hard to change a line on a chart because it's something tangible. A lot of what we do is not tangible, so that really helps when they've got real metrics to deal with. And make sure that you prioritize the testing, and make sure that you are testing to those priorities, because time is probably going to be insufficient. And our metrics should show that. But that way people aren't going to be blamed. They're not going to feel like they can't do their job. They understand that there's a priority and that they're supposed to test to those priorities. And when they run out of time, that's your problem, not the individual's problem. So make sure that the blame isn't being thrown around. Get everybody to understand what testing's like, and then they won't be blaming the testing team. Count the numbers. I think I've been all over this. Make sure you've got the right metrics. Make sure your defect tracking system is tracking it. Make sure your reports and graphs are not too complicated, because as soon as you put up a report that's too complicated, people just figure you're stupid and can't write a report. Not that they're stupid and they can't understand it. Remember, red, yellow, green. That's what people really want to see. Is that are things good or not? If they're not green, then we'll talk. Nobody digs for the real numbers. It's easier to just assume you don't have any. So if you want to be backing stuff up with numbers, you need to have those out there. So plan to track and use the tracking that you're going to do to plan your next projects. Make preemptive metrics or be sure that you have the preemptive metrics so that you can stop that blame game. People know the project's in trouble long before it's a disaster. They could see the trend, and make sure that you're pointing out that trend, because they need to understand that it's not you that's making this thing be bad. It's maybe the incoming quality or not enough time or whatever. And then make sure that the individuals in your group understand how important those metrics are, because they need to enter the data that we're going to use to actually do that. Showing the actual value. So the value of testing has to be shown in terms of time and cost savings. So we've got to have a return on the investment in the test team, and we want to make sure that people can see that testing is an expense with a high return, not a low return. So remember, quality doesn't just happen. You've got to plan it, it's got to be implemented, it's got to be maintained. So fixing the visible value, use the metrics, show the real numbers for real projects, show your risk mitigation, your coverage of your code, the DDP, and the cost of quality. Those are the 4 biggies. If you want to just boil it down to 4 things you've got to be showing, that's the 4. People should feel good about testing. They should also be a little uneasy about residual risk, because there is risk and they need to understand that. Quality's got to be embraced by everybody. Everybody's got to understand that those 4 metrics reflect the whole team, not the testing team, the whole project team. That's what those metrics are talking about. So rather than presenting these as the test team metrics, these are the quality metrics for the project. And you'll get a lot further that way, because people will understand that, I make a difference on risk mitigation. Oh, wow, I didn't know that. And that kind of helps instead of going, oh, the test team, yeah, who cares, right? It's like, no, these are everybody's metrics. So in the long term, continuing education keeps testers current, it keeps them interested, and they see that their career is growing. Because, I mean, you never want to train people so they leave you, but you want to train them so they could. They want to feel like they're growing. You want to feel like their skills are developing. I just launched off a group at work that are doing, they're learning Load Runner because we don't have a performance testing team. So they're learning Load Runner, and one of the guys came to me and he goes, you know, I actually feel like I'm able to build my job skills. He sounded stunned, but you know, it is a benefit, right? It is a benefit to keep current and to learn new stuff. So let them do it. It benefits you too as you're growing your team and building your group. It definitely helps everybody out. Good testers want to improve. Look at the advanced and the expert levels. Make sure that they have a path to go that way. I mean, the advanced syllabi are good. They're stable. There's a lot of good knowledge in there. Expert levels are coming together, and again, man, it's stuff that's great. I read a draft of the or part of the security expert security syllabus. Wow, it's going to be great. I mean, it's all kinds of cool stuff in there. So you know, expand that knowledge, but leverage what they've already got. Show them that what they've learned is actually valuable and useful. And keep your best practices in place. It's so easy to fall into bad habits. Put a checkpoint on your calendar every month and say, are we still doing this, or are we getting slack? Are we not using our test plans again, or are we forgetting to have those risk meetings, right? Make sure that you've got something to jog yourself, because you know you have to get back into the real thing too with time and schedule pressures. So make sure that what you're doing was working for you. Make sure your reporting is consistent and it's automated. So our goals for our certified team here, we want to be improving always. We want to continue learning. We want to build on what we know and build that in such a way that it helps our organization. We want to always produce quality, which goes with performing consistently. That's performing consistently well. Performing consistently badly, not so good, but you know, performing consistently well. Finding satisfaction and maintaining pride, building that team so that they're happy, they're proud of what they do, and people understand what they do. And that's what's going to get you more time eventually and more money in the overall organization. But you've got to prove it. It's not going to just happen. And that was it, my last one. Now I went to this magical
that's fine, Judy.
overall
So thank you very much for a wonderful presentation, Judy. If anyone does have any questions, feel free to go ahead and put them into your questions console in the GoToWebinar control panel that you have. I do have a few questions that we'll try and cover very quickly, and we'll do so just in the next 5 or 6 minutes so that we can get everyone back to where you need to be in the next few minutes. The first question that came through was, I've not done a decision table. Could you show or describe an example of what that might be?
I don't have the slides right here in front of me, but you know, certainly if you look in the ISTQB syllabus, actually it doesn't give much of an explanation. You're better to look in some of the books that describe it. So any of the ISTQB foundation level or advanced level certification books will give you a really good description of it. You probably can also find them online, although last time I looked it was a little more complicated. But you know, if you want to drop me an email, I'll send you an example if that would help. But
okay,
definitely
and Judy,
go ahead.
I should ask, what could you give an email address to the group here real quickly? And if you want, I can actually type it. I can send that to everyone if you'd like.
Sure, yeah, it's Judy A. McKay at earthlink.net. It's my real email, so don't be spamming me, guys.
All right, and I had another question about metrics, and they were hoping to see some examples of metrics as well. Is that something that you had some sort of sample report or an example somewhere that we could post on the ASTQB website in the resources area or something?
Yeah, I can do that. Let's do that.
Okay, and I should let everyone know that a copy of the presentation slides are currently available as of yesterday, in fact, that they're found in the resources tab, Certified Tester Resources tab of the ASTQB website, so astqb.org, and look for the Certified Testers Resources tab. There you can find a copy of the slides, and in a few days we'll also have a recording of this session available. In just a few minutes that we have left, Judy, one or two more questions here. What do you usually see as the most difficult aspect in getting people to use the knowledge they've gained from certification? So as a manager, how do you get people to actually use that knowledge?
Well, the biggest problem I see is that they go off and they get their certification and then they come back and they're just consumed by their daily job. And they go right back into their old habits instead of using the new techniques and things that they've learned. So partly that's because they just don't have time, and partly it's because they're a little afraid to use the new techniques. So having the sessions, kind of the training sessions, lunch kinds of things to leverage those new techniques, really good. And also making sure that they get some time, just a little break in their schedule so that they're able to learn something and do a little cross training. I think that really helps. And by the way, also managers, you ought to have your certification too. If your people are certified, you ought to be certified. It's a quick way to lose the respect of your people if they have higher certifications than you do. Just a note there.
Okay, very good. And Judy, do you have examples of, this may be a little bit broader, but do you have examples of how this applies to Agile development? Are there other considerations that people need to consider if they are working with Agile developers?
With Agile, one of the great things with Agile is the test team is usually, well, first of all, the test team is not a separate team. The testers are embedded in the Agile teams. So you tend to not have the with respect. That tends to be kind of right up front because you're working right there with them. The reviews are automatic. You know, they're just part of the agile profile there. When you go through and you do the reviews and everybody's kind of building the product together. So you really don't have a lot of the issues with that perception of, oh, the test team, man, they don't do any good. Now, one thing I have had an issue with, though, in Agile teams is there's an expectation of a higher level of technical capability. Usually your Agile people need to be able to sit with the developers and speak in developer. Otherwise, there can be this, you know, you don't really know what you're talking about. So that is important to make sure that you've got people that understand the product well, or bringing some level of knowledge that the developers will respect. But otherwise, most of this, you know, metrics-wise and all that still applies to Agile. You know, you still want to see your defect detection percentage. You still want to see, you know, that things are not escaping from phase to phase.
Okay. Just a couple of more questions here. Someone writes, I am in the process of having 30-plus software testers going through training for CTFL certification. What are some of the first new things I should anticipate the team doing? Your list was broad. I'm curious what you would select as the first or second items to encourage the team to start actually doing.
So the first one, personally, the first ones I would do is to pick a testing technique that you want them to apply. So I would have them come back and say, okay, I want to see you guys using decision tables. I want to see you guys using, if you have combinatorial testing, I want to see you applying that. I want to see you doing equivalence partitions. So actually make them, because the techniques are very tangible. You know, you can see those, you can apply them directly. Now, for your more senior folks, maybe writing test plans, maybe that makes sense in your organization. The other one that I think is really important is the reviews, taking their newfound knowledge of how to do good reviews and participating actively in those. But getting them right to work on implementing those techniques and making sure that they see a gain back from them. Now, again, you may have to, like I was saying, people can be a little reluctant to use them. You may have to have some sessions to leverage that knowledge and get them so that they can really use them and understand it. But those would be the ones I would go after, those specific testing techniques, maybe parts of the test planning if they don't normally do that, and reviews. Those would be the ones I would hit first.
Okay, that's very helpful. And I know there may have been one or two other questions. If you'd like, go ahead and send those to Judy at her email address if they're pertinent to this. If not, you can also perhaps send them to info@astqb.org, and we may be able to get you an answer along those lines as well. I want to thank Judy again. I saw several comments coming through in the questions panel also that were thanking Judy for a session that really helped testers, especially those from the idea of test management and how to work with their team. So I do appreciate your time, and I thank everyone for participating in this. I will go ahead and put Judy's email out here again one more time. Or Judy, if you could just repeat it one more time so that people have that.
Okay, it's Judy A. McKay, JudyAMCKAY @earthlink.net.
Okay, thank you very much. So as a reminder, the webinar presentation will be available in approximately a few days here, not long. And I also want to call your attention to, if you've not seen some of the announcements going out on that, I'd like to invite all of you to join us at the ASTQB conference, which takes place next March 24th through the 26th, so that's 2014, so a few months from now. It takes place in beautiful San Francisco at the Hyatt Fisherman's Wharf. There'll be tutorials, full-day tutorials on March 24th, conference and exhibits March 25th through 26th. This is a pretty neat event. They're only allowing 200 people to attend, so it's not one of these where you'll feel like you're lost in the crowd. It is very much geared toward those that have a great respect for what you do as ISTQB certified professionals, and it should be a wonderful, wonderful event. You can find more information on that and all of the various certified tester resources at the ASTQB website, which again is ASTQB.org. So I want to thank Judy one more time, and with that, we will conclude today's presentation.
Thank you, everyone.